What's going on, everybody? Welcome back for another episode of Shooting It Straight with myself, Justin Jackson, and my man, John. Before we get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to Johnny T shirt. Need any kind of UNC apparel, that's the spot to go to. And then also Congruity HR, where Tar Heel fans can get a free payroll and HR needs assessment at any time. So definitely go give Congruity a check out. Appreciate both of them for being the sponsors for today's video. John, another interesting week of basketball, I'll say. Obviously, UNC gets the big dub against the rival, um, the team down the road. Huge win. I think there were some things in that game that were evident as far as why they won. And then they go into a game against Clemson, who they played previously in the year, won by 10 at Clemson. And not the same turnout. Not necessarily what I think the team wanted to see, not what fans wanted to see, not what we wanted to see. UNC loses to Clemson 80-76 at home. Um, Interesting game. I think there's a bunch of different, obviously, we'll talk about it as the show goes on, but I think there's a bunch of different things that created this kind of game for UNC. I think it is tough to come off of a game that's as emotional and draining and uh, takes as much energy out as a game against Duke does, to come into a game where Clemson, at the end of the day, Clemson needs these ACC wins more at this particular time than UNC does. And they came out and played that way. Obviously, UNC fought in the second half to bring the game back, close and to give themselves a chance. But shout out to Clemson and them making plays whenever they need to make plays. I think one of the biggest things that we've seen all season, and something that I feel like it's a broken record, is just shooting the ball. It's tough in college basketball to have a big who, and we'll talk about him, in a little bit, but to have a big that can dominate on the block like Armando, but not have guys around him that could space the floor and knock down shots. And I think when you look at this game, obviously, Harrison had an unbelievable game against Duke, really showed up, really did some big things. He went 3 for 5 from 3, 4 for 7 overall. But then you look outside of that, even RJ didn't have a great shooting night. 7 for 22, 5 for 12 from 3 isn't bad, but 7 for 22 that's a tough night for a guy who's been as consistent as RJ. And the one guy that I feel like we have talked about a ton as far as what his role has to be for this team to be as successful as they can be is Cormac Ryan. And, there's a lot of times whenever, I sympathize with a shooter who goes through shooting slumps, just from me being kind of that myself and having experienced those times where it just feels like you can't find the basket. But at the same time, for you to be as big of a piece for this team, you cannot have as many games where you just have not hit shots as Cormac has had. And, 1 for 10 from the field, 0 for 6 from 3, 2 points total, and playing 30 minutes and being one of the key guys in a game like this where maybe RJ is struggling at times, or there's not really any other production outside of Mondo. You have to be able to step up and knock down shots. You just have to. There's no way around it. If this is a championship caliber team, which I think we both feel like it very much is, you have to be able to step up and knock down some shots. And, we've talked about certain things to get shooters out of slumps, certain things that help or that have helped me, in the past whenever I've had those games where I just can't find the basket at all. But eventually it's going to get to a point where you just kind of have to find it within yourself, and you've got to find that confidence again. You got to find that rhythm, whatever that looks like. Whether, it sounds corny, but at times some people, they even go back and they watch highlights of themselves. They watch whether it was in high school or it was in college or things like that, just to kind of get that feeling back of kind of, okay, this is who I am. And this is who I've shown I can be. This is, when I've been the best that I could possibly be, this is what happens. So I don't know what it is, but Cormac has to shoot the ball better. And, it's not even a situation where it's, oh, I think as long as he, gives them just a little bit, I think this team can be good. At this point, Cormac has to be a consistent knockdown shooter from the outside, or else this team is going to struggle. So I think that's the first number one thing that might take away from the game. I think the next thing, and we kind of talked about it, Mondo's aggressiveness and assertiveness that he's shown in the last few games, I think is exactly what we have talked about. And especially, I think it was even on the last show, and even with Bryce when we were talking about, you know, I feel like Mondo has to be more involved from just the standpoint of getting the ball, whether he's going to score, whether he's drawing a double team to kick out, whether he's the one in this, the screen and roll actions, whatever it might be, he has to be involved because of the gravity and the attention that he gets when he gets the ball. And obviously, he's shown in the last two games against Duke and now against Clemson that when he gets the ball, he's going to cause some issues for the other team. I think against Duke, I think you saw him go against Filipowski, who's more of a versatile big, but he's still close to 7 feet and a bigger body, and you kind of saw him dominate down low. Then you see him go against a guy like PJ Hall and the other bigs that they have in this game and finish with 24 and 13. And I think when you see him be aggressive from that standpoint, if you have Cormac hit three or four more of his shots. You have RJ, maybe you take his shots down a little bit, but he hits four or five more of his shots. This game's a totally different game. And obviously it's easy to go back and say, well, if this happened, if that happened. But we've seen consistently RJ has been more, efficient than 7 for 22. And, if he shoots a little bit better and Mondo's able to play this way, I think that game is a totally different game, and I think that's where UNC kind of takes that next step. Um, so I like what I'm seeing from Mondo. I think him being aggressive and them getting him involved. He shot 11 free throws, which means in the paint, anytime he got the ball, either he was scoring, getting fouled, or something good was happening for UNC. So I love to see him be aggressive. I love to see him do that each and every game, whether that is him scoring 24 points or him scoring 6 points, whatever it might look like. Him getting that ball causes the other team to be in rotation if they double, causes the attention to kind of come off of RJ or the shooters outside. So then it's an easy kick outs, easy shots, guys able to line things up with a little bit more time. And so hopefully he can continue that. And then obviously I think RJ is going to do what RJ does. Obviously I think if we were to ask him, how would you say that, your offensive game was this game? I think he would probably say himself that I didn't shoot the ball as efficient as I usually do. And there were some shots that I normally hit. I mean, he's a 90% free throw shooter and he missed two in this game against Clemson as well. So I think at times there's just games like that for the star players or the guys that carry that heavy load. It just happens at times. But other guys have to step up as well. So those were kind of my two big takeaways, was just kind of Armando's dominance, but also the shooting that has to come from Cormac and the consistency that has to come from the other guys around those guys. Um, what do you think? What do you think were some takeaways that you saw as you kind of watched the game that maybe were stood out to you or made sense as to why the game went in the direction that it went?
Yeah, I think to start, I'd love to add on Armando. He was 10 of 11 on free throws, as you said. That's a career high for him in made free throws. Actually ties a number that he set against Tennessee earlier in the season. Armando has played a lot of basketball for UNC. Anytime he's setting a career high, especially in free throw attempts, that's a big deal, or in free throw makes more specifically. And then yeah, with Cormac, I think it's important to kind of break down the data a little bit on his shooting. I'm looking at his shot chart from CBB Analytics. He's not just struggling from the 3-point line, and I think that's important to call out. Over his last 10 games, he's 6 of 15 at the rim, 40% from there. That's a low number. I think that's one of the reasons why his effective field goal percentage over the last 5 games is 36.5%. And to put that in context, that's the second percentile nationally, which is not good. So it's clear that Cormac is not just going through a shooting slump, but he's struggling finishing at the rim as well. It's kind of all compounding a little bit into his game. And I think another thing that stood out to me was just UNC's lack of energy and kind of lack of effort last night. It's something the players talked about as well. After the game, RJ Davis said, "This is probably our first game where I think the energy wasn't there." And we actually had a listener question about this, Justin. I'm curious to get your thoughts. This is from Heal Thy Soul. He asks, "Would love to hear Justin's thoughts on the hangover game theories. Jay Williams and others have said it's not a real thing, but the numbers seem to bear it out. Anecdotal evidence as well. It seemed like maybe last night was a hangover game for North Carolina after the big Duke win. What do you think, Justin?"
Um, I think I'm going to have to disagree with Jay Williams and some of the other people that say that, hangover games aren't a thing from the standpoint of if North Carolina hadn't already played Clemson, I would say that it's not a thing, because it's a brand new opponent, brand new challenge. Um, but anytime you go into a rivalry game, for North Carolina, it's NC State or Duke. Anytime you go into a rivalry game, especially the Duke North Carolina game, there's a lot more emotions that go into it that you don't even realize. There's college game day that shows up on game day. So, you see all the trucks, you see all the college game day, gear and things like that all around. Then you go into basically the setup for the game. So whether that's if it's on a regular school day, then obviously you have to go to classes, you go to whatever it might be, and as the day goes on, the adrenaline, the emotions just kind of build. So then you get into the game, and obviously the fans are rocking, the Dean Dome was rocking, and they're playing well. They're playing defense. They're locking, for the most part, they're locking a lottery pick. Most people would say in Filipowski, they're really giving him trouble, doing things that they're supposed to be doing to win that game, and they play at a high level and pull out, a rivalry win. So then Franklin Street is lit. I think there was some there were some videos of guys like Cormac and things like that out on Franklin Street after the game. And, obviously you want to celebrate and enjoy that moment because it's tough to win, an ACC game, let alone a rivalry game against Duke. So you want to enjoy that a little bit. But then you go into a game against Clemson, who you've already beat by 10 at their place. You kind of know the personnel that they have. You kind of remember how that game went, the things that worked, the things that didn't, things like that. And so you go in with uh, you're a little more comfortable than you normally would against a brand new opponent. And so I think that's where I would disagree with, that hangover games is just it's just an excuse, I guess some people would say, because I think, before this game happened, I was kind of worried that it would be that kind of game just because of everything that goes into the Duke game. And now basically, after the celebration and stuff like that, basically 2 days later, you have to show back up and you got to beat a team who's pretty desperate, a team that you already beat. So they're coming in with more fire than the first game. And then at the end of the day, Clemson has some really good players. PJ Hall was, an all ACC guy preseason. You got Gerard, who's been in college for a while, been in the ACC for a while, who had some huge shots against him. And then you have everybody else. You've got another guy in, I think what you say his last name is Shefflin. You got a guy like him who, honestly, I haven't seen many guys go against Harrison that kind of, I don't necessarily want to say get the best of him, but he gives Harrison some issues. And so you've got guys like that that are coming in desperate with even more energy, with a fire to them that's a little bit, probably a little bit different than a North Carolina team that just came off of a big time win. So, not saying that it's an excuse by any means, because at the end of the day, when you win that Duke game, your next job is the next game. And coach always used to say when we were there, the most important game is the next game. And um, they obviously didn't do what they were supposed to do to prepare for Clemson, because from the jump, like you had mentioned, from the jump, Clemson looked like they were moving at a different speed. They were moving at a different physicality than North Carolina. They were defensively, they were moving quicker. They were getting to their rotations quicker, just kind of from the jump ball. And it's hard whenever you get into a hole that early and you're just playing from behind all game long. And that's kind of what North Carolina was doing. Um, so I would say that hangover games are real. And I would say that it's the player's job to prepare and get ready for those games that could possibly be the hangover games. And you probably have to prepare a little bit extra and get your mind right a little bit more than you normally would, because you're already coming off of the feeling and the high that you got from beating a Duke team. Because that's another thing too, is everybody wants to say that it's just another game, it's just another win or another loss. There is a different feeling to a win against Duke than there is against Boston College or Clemson, Wake Forest. Like, there's just a different feel to it. That it's almost a high of, man, like, that was a huge game that we just pulled off. Now we have the bragging rights right now because we just beat our rival down the road, and then you come into this game. So I think North Carolina has to do a better job of obviously, as the season goes on, when you have big wins, especially once tournament time comes, you have to be able to bounce back and move on to the next game pretty quickly. And I think this was a good game for them, even though it was a loss. I think it's a good, being able to see that aspect of, hey, yeah, we got a big win against Duke, against some, Duke had some really good players that we were able to do some good things against, and obviously the coaching and things like that. And now we have to lock it back in and get right back into this game against Clemson or whoever it is going forward. So it's another learning experience. Once again, there's a lot of guys on this team that have never really experienced true winning when you really look at it. The only guys that you can really look at is Mondo and RJ. Those are the only guys who have really been in a winning situation, on a consistent basis. And so it takes a different mindset whenever you are in winning mode, as opposed to, okay, well, we're just going out here just to try to do our best, or we're not really playing for anything, but we're just going to try to give our all. There's a different mindset whenever you expect to win and you are expected to win. There's just a different brain, different part of the brain that you have to kind of get woken up a little bit whenever you're not used to it. So at the end of the day, it's a learning experience, and I think this game was good to happen right now. You look at kind of the rest of their ACC play; it's not necessarily easy. So having this kind of bump in the road, I think, was good for them.
And I think another reason why you could say it was a hangover game is just because of how it started. I mean, Clemson went on a 13-0 run to start the game. They took a 15-2 lead, equaled the largest run of the season by an opponent. Florida State also did it back in December, but I think that's another point. It seems like UNC kind of got punched in the mouth before they realized what was really happening in the game, and then they did settle in, but it's too late. I think another thing with this game was there was no Seth Trimble, and that's a big deal for UNC. Obviously we don't know his situation, so we don't want to speculate and hope he's okay too. But Justin, did you notice the impact of not having Seth out there? And looking ahead a little bit, how could that impact the team against Miami and moving forward if he's not out there?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely miss somebody who's as consistent and as constant as Seth is. He's not. We've talked about it. He's not necessarily going to be somebody that goes out and gets 30 or really fills up the box score, but he's somebody that gives you, when he comes into the game, he gives you that the effort defensively. He's going to guard offensively. Most of the time, he's in the right spot. He's shooting the ball really well this year. So when he catches the ball, you have pretty good confidence that if he's open, he can knock down the shot. And then getting out of transition, he's an unbelievable athlete. So it gives you a whole nother aspect that maybe they didn't have, out there on the floor. So you miss his presence no matter what. Um, I think obviously I hope that he's healing up, he's good, as the season goes on. Um, and I hope that he's able to, kind of bounce back and come right back into it and get right back into the flow. But I think once again, this is kind of where everybody else has to step up. It's where Cormac has to hit some more shots as opposed to going for 0 for 6 from three. It's where RJ has to shoot a little bit more consistently in a game like this. As much as we've been praising him, it just kind of comes with the responsibility of being the ACC Player of the Year. Like when you have a rough shooting night, most of the time it's going to be a rough night for your team unless other guys step up. So, um, it's kind of a trickle down effect whenever you have a guy that's as constant as Seth for this team have to be out. Everybody else has to step up, and if they don't, you kind of start to see other issues start to be glaring. I think one shout out I want to give is Pax. I want to give a shout out to him. Um, I mean, all season he really hasn't played much at all. And so for him to come out, play 22 minutes, 2 for 4 from the field, and 7 points, 6 rebounds, um, that's the definition of staying ready. When you hear, me personally, I hate the whole saying of "stay ready," but when you hear coaches say, "Hey, stay ready for your moment's coming," yada yada, that's the definition of it. Like, hey, I haven't played much at all the last 10 games, but Seth is out. Things aren't really rolling for us. So I get 20 minutes in a game and I go out there and I produce and I help the team in certain ways. So shout out to him for sure for doing that. Um, it's unfortunate that it's been so inconsistent, whether it's the play of, Withers and Washington and guys like that. But shout out to him for stepping up whenever his name was called. That's huge. And for a championship aspiring team, you have to have certain guys like that. For instance, everybody knows Luke by his unbelievable shot that sent us to the Final Four. But up until that point, Luke really didn't play much. And he didn't play. It wasn't like he was playing unbelievable that he probably should have been playing. But no matter what, Luke was always in the gym extra. Luke was always getting extra work in. So when his time came for that Sweet 16 and Elite Eight games, he was probably the best player on the floor at times. I mean, he had a double double both games, had the game winning shot to send us to the Final Four. Um, so you need people to always be ready and to be able to step into those roles and to be able to step up whenever maybe a game, you know, somebody goes out hurt or a game isn't flowing the way that it normally does. And you need a different look. You need guys like that. So maybe Pax is that guy. Maybe somebody else off the bench is that guy down the road. But shout out to him during the game against Clemson for stepping into that. That was definitely big. I wanted to give him a shout out. Um, but then too, I think with Seth not being in the game, that means normally a guy like Elliot would play more. And when I look at the box score, Elliot played 20 minutes. Now he had 3 fouls, so being in foul trouble is always tough. But you know, I, it's tough whenever there's inconsistency in the play of main guys. That's what's tough. Now, Elliot's a freshman. He's still figuring out, even though we're pretty far into the season, he's still trying to figure things out. Um, but when I look back on our 2017 team, for the most part, everybody was pretty consistent who were kind of the leaders of the team. Um, everybody was pretty. Hold on. Everybody was pretty consistent. Everybody was pretty reliable, from a day to day basis. Everybody was, you knew what you were going to get from Joel. You knew what you were going to get from Kennedy and Isaiah. You knew what you were going to get from Kenny and then Theo, from Nate. You knew what you were getting from all of those guys, right? There were some games where guys didn't have it going. Some guys couldn't, you know, get into a rhythm, or some guys, they weren't able to step up at certain times. It happens in basketball. But for the most part, you knew game in and game out what you could expect from certain guys. There's times with this roster that you don't necessarily know what you're going to get from Elliot. You don't necessarily know what you're going to get from Cormac. Sometimes you don't necessarily know what you're going to get from Harrison at times. And from the bench, it's been up and down all season long. So I think that's something that I want to watch as these ACC games kind of continue, is can there be some sort of consistency across the board that allows this team to get into a full rhythm, to where everybody knows, hey, this is what I do, this is what the team needs me to do, and game in and game out, I'm expected to do that. Because, like I said previously, if you're going to be a championship team, there has to be some sort of consistency. So I think that's one of the things I'm going to be watching as the season goes on, is can there be, from top to bottom, can there be more consistency from Mondo, RJ, all the way down to a guy like Zayden High if he gets his opportunity? Can there be consistency each and every time they step on the floor? Because that's going to be important as the season, kind of comes into tournament time and gets into the real winning time.
And I think it's interesting with Elliott as well because it seemed like he was getting consistently better. And I think over the last few games, he's been bothered a little bit with how defenses have been guarding him. Against Duke, it was particularly egregious, but other teams have been doing it well, really sagging off of Elliott, forcing him to take jump shots. I don't have the number in my head, but I think he shot a pretty bad percentage from the field against Duke, and a lot of that was just sort of jump shots where he was wide open. Now, he's a smart
Mhm.
basketball player. He's made some smart adjustments over the course of the season. I think there's a ton of opportunities for Elliott to screen for RJ. I would love to see more guard to guard screens there, where if Elliott has the ball and the defender's sagging off of him, bam, quick dribble handoff right into RJ, and then RJ can use that space. Elliott was doing that a little bit as an off ball screener against Duke, but I think that there's more that they could do with him as a playmaker, and then that would sort of force defenses to step back up and guard him and allow him to drive a little bit better. When you look at Elliott's play and, you probably saw him shooting some of those jumpers the last few games as well. What do you think is the next step there for him offensively, and maybe how can he continue to unlock his game and be more consistent through the last part of ACC play?
Well, the first thing that everybody has to understand is the hardest part about ACC play and conference play is that, especially come second time around when you play a team, they know every action that you run. For us, it was always secondary break, which every person in the country knew our secondary break. But it was secondary break. Um, we had a box set that everybody knew. They would call out. If we called out the play, they would call it out themselves and be ready to guard it. So that's the one thing that all of us have to always remember, is that, okay, this is second time around with Clemson. They already saw it one time. They watch film just like North Carolina watches film. The coaches prepare them just like North Carolina prepares the players. So when they go into a game, especially the second game around, they've already looked and seen, okay, hey, we're okay if Elliott is shooting jump shots consistently throughout the game. Like, we are okay. What we can't do is we cannot let Armando get going. We cannot let RJ get going. We can't let the shooters get open looks, right? So it's basketball is always kind of a give and take. You always have to give up something, especially on defense. And so obviously I think that the past couple of games, what you've seen is the one thing that everybody is willing to give up is, hey, look, we're going to stop everybody else. And if Elliott gets an open shot, then we're okay. Now, if he hits a few, if he shows that he can be consistent with it, Now we might have to make another adjustment. But Elliot hasn't shown throughout the season that he can be consistent enough to actually win a game for North Carolina from the outside. So, kind of going off of, I like the points that you make as far as learning how to play with guys not necessarily guarding you in that way. Like this was something that the past few years with a guy like Leaky Black and things like that, that teams didn't really fully guard at times. They just used their man as like a help side defender or just to clog the paint. There has to be things that you teach guys of how to play. So whether that is like when he gets the ball on a swing situation and his guy's not guarding you, yes, you have to at times keep them honest. And at times you have to just go ahead and just let that one ride. Hopefully you make it. Hopefully, you can find some sort of rhythm and maybe you get it going a little bit. But if it's not working, then you have to know, hey, okay, well, if I'm getting the ball and my guy is so far off me, I mean, against Duke, there was times where the defender was like at the free throw line. So if I know I get the ball and my defender is at the free throw line, then like you said, it's an easy dribble handoff to somebody like RJ, who's now, if you clip his man off of the dribble handoff, now he's coming off with a guy that's at the free throw line. So basically, that defender is at RJ's mercy. Or if you're somebody that they don't close out to or whatever, now you become a screener. So now you're screening for RJ. You're screening for Mondo to get onto the block. You're doing certain things to keep. At the end of the day, you have to keep your defender honest. It's some way. And so when you do that, I think it's a matter of, okay, now we've got to figure out ways to just get him involved, to get him in the flow of the offense, as opposed to now he's just the guy that they swing it to and he's the one that's wide open. So in his mind, if I'm open, I got to shoot it. So I don't know necessarily, what it is that, adjustments that they might make. But the hardest thing about ACC play is that these teams have seen you so many times. They've played you so many times. They know every play that you run. They know every call that you might call out. So what can you do to make small little minor adjustments as the season goes on to give yourself some sort of advantage? Um, and like we talked about, he's still learning. If we come back next year and we're talking about Elliot Cadeau, I guarantee you he's a completely different player this time next year than he is right now. It's just the way it works. He's supposed to be a senior in high school. He's a freshman in college playing against. I mean, Gerard is what, a fifth year senior. Like
He
he's
might
got
be as
guys
old
who.
as you. I don't know.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you've got. I mean, he's playing with a 25-year-old, let alone playing against guys that are that old. So it's a learning curve and a learning experience that I think everybody thinks that you can just snap your finger and he can be the same player he was in high school now all of a sudden on this UNC team, and it's just not how it works. And so as the games go on, and I'm sure the coaching staff is doing, you know, exactly what they're supposed to be doing as far as watching film with him, showing areas that he can be more aggressive in, or showing him areas where, hey, if your guy's sagging off this much, like go into an away screen, get somebody else open, become a screener, go into a DHO, do something to keep the offense moving and to keep the advantage. Because at the end of the day, he has an advantage when somebody is guarding him that way. You have an advantage, you just have to find it. And um, and at the same time, I think he has to continue to work on his shooting ability. That's just a part of with where basketball is moving to and where it already is. You have to be able to shoot or at least be respectable to be able to continue climbing when it comes to whether it's in college or getting to the NBA, getting to any professional basketball play nowadays. You have to be able to shoot somewhat. So, we'll see if he can kind of get, that rhythm or get the shooting touch a little bit as this season finishes. But if not, then just got to find different ways to be effective. And, I'm sure those guys on that coaching staff are doing everything they can to kind of help him out and help the team when it comes to that. So, you know, learning experiences, it's always losses are always better learning experiences. It sounds weird, but they're always better learning experience than wins. A lot of times wins are able to cover up some issues that you have. Losses, they become very, very glaring. And I think there were some things in this game that maybe were covered up a little bit with some of the wins that they had, but because they lost, I think now it's easy to kind of see some of the holes that they have to be a little more consistent in.
We've been talking a lot about screening on the offensive end. I want to flip sides of the ball real quick because we have a great question from Mick Glove. He submitted this question on the Inside Carolina Premium message board. So be sure to subscribe to that and feel free to submit questions there for Justin and I to tackle on each week's Shooting It Straight. He asks, we seem to do better when we get through screens to avoid mismatches. How difficult is it to do that consistently? There are a lot of times against Clemson where there were some mismatches. RJ got stuck on a few of Clemson's bigs. Justin, how would you navigate that?
I think it's game to game. I think against a team like Clemson, they've got a lot of guys who look to post up. They've got a lot of guys to look to take advantage of those mismatches. You don't necessarily want Elliot switching on PJ Hall because he's probably just going to take him right to the block. He's going to take RJ right to the block. Like he's going to do that on a consistent basis if he gets those mismatches. There was even a few guards. I think it was Hunter took some guys to the block a few times. Um, Gerard didn't necessarily go to the block, but he was able to take advantage of some of the pick and rolls, the high screens coming off those shooting and things like that. So I think it depends on the matchup. When you have a game like a team like this and a matchup like this, a lot of times you do want to try to keep matchups on matchups. But the other issue is when you do that, a lot of times the screens become a lot more of an issue than they would if you just switched everything. Because now if you have a high ball screen, if you have Armando in a drop because we're trying to keep him on PJ Hall, if PJ Hall gets any kind of hit on any of those guards up top, that guard is either coming off free and able to score on his own, or he's all of a sudden attracting two and against a guy that can stretch the floor like PJ, that's just going to pick and pop. That's just a lineup three for him every time. And you kind of saw that throughout the game. I mean, how many bigs have we seen North Carolina play that has shot 10 threes? Their five-man shot 10 threes. So that's where it gets tough because now if you switch and you say, hey, look, y'all just have to battle. And if the bigs get it down low, then we double or, we bring somebody from the low side. Now, then that's whenever they can take advantage of guys in the post if they get it quick and go to score quick. Or now you're playing a rotation all night long because now he just swings it out and there's two guys on him. So now the guy has to run out, rotate on. And it's hard to play in rotations all game long. So it's tough in a game like this. It's also really tough when you don't have a guy like Seth on the floor from this standpoint because even though he's smaller, he's stronger. He can battle a little bit more. He can defend a little bit better in the post. But this is a game where, me personally, I feel like a guy like Jalen Withers should be a big part and a key part. The Washington should be in there as a big part, just from being able to switch and still be with these bigs that are involved. Um, so I think for me, when I look at that standpoint, if we're talking about matchups, I feel like the bigger players in this situation maybe should have been on the floor a little bit more because now when you have that, if you have Jalen Withers switching on to PJ Hall and Mondo is now guarding, a guard out front, now you're comfortable with what's going on because you're not necessarily worried about PJ Hall getting the ball and then just going and scoring easily on Jalen Withers. You're not necessarily worried about their point guards really attacking Mondo. That's one of the things I feel like Mondo has really gotten better at is being able to contain guards when they switch. But because now you have RJ and Elliot on the floor at the same time, now you have to stay in coverage to try to keep the matchups. And I think that's where you saw a lot of Gerard's threes were kind of coming off of those high pick and rolls with the indecision of Mondo being further back in a drop and RJ getting hit by the screen and then him getting downhill a little bit more. And now PJ's popping and, it's just causing issues for the defense from that standpoint. So to answer the question, I think it's matchup based, and I think this team has the personnel to be able to do either or. But I think this game in particular, I think you kind of saw the issues of having two smaller guards and a team taking advantage of that on a consistent basis.
North Carolina has Miami and Syracuse up next. A little bit of a road trip for the Tar Heels after their two-game homestand. We're in the closing stretches of ACC play, if you can believe it. It's crazy how quickly the season has gone. After the game, there was some talk about UNC's bad practices in the lead up, a little bit of talk around shoot around as well and how shoot around went. It got us curious, Justin. I'm wondering if you can kind of take us through UNC basketball game day as a player and pretend it's like a Tuesday or something. So you might have class in the morning. That maybe is a
Mhm.
good spot to start. I know different players have different routines. I think Isaiah Hicks used to talk about how like he would go into the student union in the middle of the day and nap for like 4 hours or something. So everyone has a little bit of a different routine on game day. But what does yours look like as a UNC basketball player?
Um, so first we would always have classes done by 1 o'clock. That was game day or non-game day. That's how our classes were always set up because usually we'd have practice in the afternoon. Um, so usually we'd have classes. I always liked getting my classes done while I was in the class. I didn't necessarily like it, but I always liked to get them done as early in the morning as possible, just so that I was done with them and I didn't have to worry about it the rest of the day. So, I mean, I'd have class whether it was an 8 a.m. or 9. I'd have it like 9 and then another one at like 10, 15, whatever, however whatever the blocks were on that day. Um, finish that, probably go get something to eat right after. We'd usually have shoot around because we would always have pregame meal 4 hours before the game. So if it was a 7:30 game, we'd have pregame meal at 3:30. So we'd probably have shoot around at 2 o'clock. So after I finish eating, I'd probably just go to the gym, hang out for a little bit. A lot of times, honestly, I would get shots up before shoot around, like a little extra shots, just not a ton, but just to get a little bit more shots up, get into a rhythm. Then we'd have shoot around. We'd have shower, get dressed. Coach always had us wear suits to pregame meal. So we'd do that, get dressed, go over to. We started having it we started having it at the Dean Dome, but we would normally go over to where was it? There was a building on campus that we would go and we would have pregame meal, and it was the same stuff every time: mashed potatoes, grilled chicken, pasta, broccoli. Um, like it was always the same stuff. So we'd finish eating that, then we'd go back to the gym, and depending on if you liked to take a nap or not, then you could take a nap in the locker room. You could do whatever leading up to the game, and then you'd usually start getting ready for the game probably an hour and a half before, 2 hours before. Um, and when I say get ready, I mean you could sometimes guys would go out there and shoot before most of the people would get there. Um, you would always activate or do something in the weight room with Jonas to kind of get your body going, get your ankles taped, get dressed, and then you kind of just start the warm up situation where you go out there, you do the breakdowns, guards go, bigs go. You finish that, we go back to the locker room. Coach would come in, talk to us about matchups, things to focus on, things like that, and then we go out there, do two line layups, and kind of get the game going. So it was definitely a full day affair when you really look at it. Um, and I always the game days with classes were always a little bit different. If it was a weekend game, if it was a Saturday or Sunday game, then it would be whatever. You wouldn't do anything leading up into the game. Then you'd go right into that, the pregame meal and all of those things that you have to do. But it's really kind of a full day affair whenever you've got classes and things like that. But at the same time, it was always fun to get ready for a game. It was always fun to prepare and even go to class. And a lot of guys would wear headphones and stuff like that throughout campus and things like that. But it just had a different feel, to the day whenever you had a game coming up. So you know, definitely miss those kind of days. I mean, nowadays you just kind of get ready for the game and go into it and see what happens. um, but it was definitely that's a part of the fun thing about going to a place like North Carolina is just the atmosphere and kind of the energy of the game days. I feel like it's just kind of different. Um, so you know, that's kind of what ours was. I think obviously things have kind of changed throughout college basketball within UNC. I think they still do pregame meal and same time and things like that. But I don't know what guys do. A lot of them have their own cars, whether they're freshmen or not now. So they might run back to the house for a little bit and then come back, or things like that. But ours was basic, and we didn't have a ton of ways to for transportation. So ours was pretty simple whenever it came to game days. It was once you were at the gym, you were pretty much there for good until game time. Um, yeah.
And if you're staying at Rams Village, I mean, that's just a 5-minute walk or whatever, too. Justin, you forgot your favorite part of the game day routine is after the game when you talk to the media. Talking to people like me is the best part of the game day routine. Of course, I know you forgot it, but that's okay. I made sure to add it in there. UNC plays Saturday against Miami, like we said, on the road. Justin, take us out after this latest episode and latest loss for the Tar Heels.
Yeah, man. It's obviously always tough. We talk about it. It's always tough whenever you got to talk and kind of learn from losses. But I think this game showed some things that will help this team down the road. I think there are things that, like we talk about, are a little more glaring in a loss than there are in wins. And for this team to be the best they can be, I think those things that were glaring are things that have to be kind of you know changed a little bit or more consistent in those areas. But at the same time, I'm not worried once again at all for this team. I think this team has everything that they need to win a championship. I think they have the coaching that they need to win a championship. And I think they have shown at times throughout the season that they are a championship level team. And consistency is the key. And I think that just grows as these games go on. And hopefully they can get back into a winning rhythm and kind of take the rest of this ACC play by storm. Win out and go into the ACC tournament and then March Madness and do what they're supposed to do. But once again, I think it's just time for us to sit back, support, uh, show some love whenever love needs to be shown, try to help out whenever we can help out. But at the same time, just you know, enjoy the show. I think a lot of times we get too worried and too locked in on the negativity that goes on, whether that's a loss or somebody not playing well or somebody not playing, um, and we just kind of lose sight of how good of basketball this team has played pretty consistently throughout the year. So hopefully they can get back on track. And I think they'll be fine. To everybody listening, everybody watching, once again, we always appreciate y'all. I cannot ever finish an episode without saying thank you. We enjoy talking about Carolina basketball and kind of giving any kind of knowledge that we have, whatever little or a lot that we might have. But we appreciate y'all listening, appreciate y'all tuning in. And until next time, we'll talk to you.